Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of On the Minute. I'm Armen Hammer. That right there, that's Justin LoFranco with the Morning Chalk Up. And today we're going to be talking about sanctioned events all over the world. And you know what? It has been 88 days since the first sanctioned event has been announced, and still no sanctioned event in Canada. Let's get to it.
Oh, all right.
You like that, don't you?
I do. I like how you snuck that in there.
First up, we're going to be talking about the relationship that Wodapalooza has been developing with the other sanctioned events. We already learned that Wodapalooza and Fittest in Cape Town have this type of relationship, but now, Justin, we have learned that the Brazil CrossFit Championships has a similar relationship with Wodapalooza. This is huge for the sport. We talked about it a little bit last week. Now, tell me exactly what's going on here.
So basically, Brazil CrossFit Championships striked a little bit of a partnership, growing this coalition of sanctioned events that are recognizing an earned exemption. It's based on your performance at Wodapalooza. So you now have 4 invites and for individual male and female athletes, and then 1 team invite that's going to be extended to top athletes. Now, the assumption that they're making here is that the number 1 athlete is going to decline that invitation, and it's actually going to go to athletes numbers 2 through 5. And then the first team would then pass on their invitation to the second team. And so what it does is it says, hey, if you place in one of those positions at Wodapalooza, we're going to give you an automatic qualification to Brazil. The reason why this really had to happen, especially for Brazil, is A, it's really tough to get down there, and it's going to be hard to encourage athletes to do that on their own. But B, the qualifier actually kicks off for Brazil the last day of competition during Wodapalooza, which makes it basically impossible for any athlete competing at Wodapalooza to really go in and have a serious shot at qualifying. So this was something they absolutely had to do, in my opinion.
Like we said last week with Fittest in Cape Town, I think this is a very important piece to actually creating a season that functions well for the athletes who are competing. Without this type of a relationship between the events, what we're looking at are all these events sitting on their own little islands. We're looking at months of qualifiers. We're looking at athletes being ground to dust. What we really want is an event and a series of events that helps sort of celebrate and reward the athletes that are doing well at these other events. And that is how you build a circuit. Now, this is just the start, so hopefully we're going to be seeing more of these, but with something like Fittest in Cape Town only taking place 10 days after Wodapalooza, that timing is really rough. The Brazil CrossFit Championships take place months after Wodapalooza, and
plenty
that
of time to
timing
recover.
is
Exactly.
perfect.
One thing I'll leave you with on this, and this is food for thought, is that right now all this stuff is being based on your placement in Wodapalooza. That does need to change eventually, but keep in mind this is the second competition of the season, so it's like saying, look, how you perform at the beginning of the season is going to dictate your access to other competitions throughout the rest of the season. So it's not exactly a bad thing, but it is all based off your positioning in Wodapalooza, and not every athlete's going to be there yet. So we do need to move beyond this eventually, but honestly, right now, this is the most encouraging sign of moving this forward. So definitely a positive thing here.
So let's go ahead and go from Miami and Brazil to Cape Town. Now, Fittest in Cape Town has wrapped up its qualifiers. It's sent out a couple of wildcard invites, and on top of that, we now have a final roster of athletes, and it looks pretty stacked. I mean, we already learned that Katrin and Cole are going to be competing at Fittest in Cape Town, but that is not just a shoo-in for them to be the champions there. There's some really talented athletes that are going to be out there.
Yeah, on the men's side, well, look, I mean, we have, on the men's side, Street Horner, Tim Paulson, Jason Smith, they came in the top 3 positions, and those are 3 former Games athletes. James Newbury, Sean Sweeney, Lucas Parker returning to the competition, Con Porter, those are the Games athletes from the men's side. Oh, and then Cole Sager, who was invited. Then on the women's side, again, stacked, Carolyn Reason-Thibault, Chelsea Hughes, Alessandra Pacelli, Courtney Haley, Lindsay Valenzuela, and then Katrin Davidsdottir and Michelle Moran, and Michelle was the winner of Fittest in Cape Town last year, who received an invite. They still actually have more wild card positions, though, and they haven't used them all up yet. So They still have 3 on the men's side and 2 on the women's side. Do you think that we could see a couple of ringers come in here? The competition is not that far away, but they have plenty of time to be able to extend a couple invites. What's your sense of whether or not that's a possibility?
I think they're hedging their bets a little bit. I think it's really smart for them to leave open wildcard invites and sort of communicate that to the fans and the competitors that, hey, there are extra spots that we may be filling with these top athletes. I think that's really smart of them to do.
Yeah.
Now, who they could be inviting, that could be anybody. I mean, I know for a fact that Fikowski has talked about competing internationally this season.
Right.
He's really got his eyes set on China.
But I wouldn't pick this one. There's 15 games athletes across the male and female division. I would probably not pick this one if I'm going to go in international, because it's a long plane flight and it's going to be pretty stacked. Not to mention, we haven't even talked about this. The number 2 and the number 3 athletes from Wodapalooza are going to get invites, and presumably, if things follow suit, if that number 2 and number 3 athlete are already going to Fitness in Cape Town, then those numbers are going to go to extend to the 4th and the 5th, etc., depending on accepting and declining. So we actually are going to add technically 2 names to this list on the male and the female side.
For sure, and for an event that honestly wasn't on the map just 5 months ago. Fitness in Cape Town is great in that area, but internationally wasn't really well known. The amount of talent that they're attracting is almost scary. I mean, this is an event that has been producing a couple decent games athletes, especially, namely Jason Smith has come out of South Africa recently, and he did incredibly well at the games. But what we're starting to see here is these competitions, at least in the case of Fitness in Cape Town, is attracting big named competitors without necessarily having the pedigree of an event like Wodapalooza.
Right.
Now, go ahead and switch tracks a little bit. Let's go back to Wodapalooza and talk about their roster of invited athletes, individual athletes that are going to be competing there in a way that, Wodapalooza has always been a huge
It's
level
the who's
of competition.
who of games athletes. It's always been like that.
Yeah, and it's a big party in Miami. It's got a big paycheck for the best athletes in the world. Who are we expecting to see compete there, Justin?
So the backstory here is that they've extended invitations to all former 2018 CrossFit Games athletes on the individual level, and so they really have the pick of the litter. But as we talked about last week, there are a number of interesting athlete choices for teams now, and they're going teams. So a lot of those people are going to get in. A lot of those people, a number of athletes are declining. So we're just now finding out who some of the individual athletes are. 3 big names. We've got Carrie Pierce on the women's side, Tia Claire Toomey also on the women's side, and then Patrick Vellner. And this is going to be a stacked competition on top of the athletes who have already qualified for Wodapalooza during the qualifier. My question is kind of around Vellner, which is are we going to see, obviously Matthew Fraser's been invited, are we going to see Fraser go into Dubai, win in Dubai, decline his invitation to Wodapalooza, and give Patrick Vellner an opportunity to go in and get that top spot? Are we going to see some athletes kind of, I don't want to say pulling punches, but basically saying no, we won't compete in this competition. We're going to let you have the rite of passage there. Do you foresee that kind of being the case here? Because we haven't heard anything from Matthew Fraser about this. He's usually like a one and done kind of guy, but it's still $35,000 on the line.
That's a big paycheck, and it's a good question. And I think it's really important to lay out the fact that Matt Fraser has never pulled punches, and
No.
I am very, very hesitant to say that he will pull his punches. However, he and Patrick Vellner share a management team, and the name Matt O'Keefe, if you are not familiar with it, you need to get familiar with it, because it is a name that is going to be making big splashes across every level of our sport in a way that we have never seen before. And so they share that management, and they have that in common. They're buds, they train together, they know each other pretty well, and there is no real precedent to see exactly whether or not someone's going to step aside. Now, we also don't know exactly what happens if Matt Fraser wins in Dubai, goes to Wodapalooza, and wins in Wodapalooza. We haven't gotten an official statement that where the next invite is going to come from.
I think our assumption, though, that we were operating on is that, look, if you go and win a sanctioned event and you go win another sanctioned event, you don't get 2 invitations, obviously.
Right.
And so you're going to collect your prize money, but the invitation is going to go to the second place person. It's kind of what the assumption, but it would be a bit imprudent to say that that's exactly what's going to happen because we just don't know. But that seems the indication from our conversations with CrossFit executives who are making this decision. Honestly, I don't see Matt Fraser going to Wodapalooza.
Yeah, I think the best assumption about Matt Fraser and Wodapalooza is that it's probably not going to be happening, especially considering he has a great chance of qualifying out of Dubai. And the Fraser-esque move here is to, a la Rocky IV, sequester himself in his cabin either in Vermont or in
Russia.
Cookeville and train for 7 months
and
to
just become an absolute,
Games.
even more of a beast. So another competition that just came up on our radar screen is strength and depth. Okay, and strength and depth is one that actually just happened. Literally, 3 or 4 weeks ago, the strength and depth non-sanctioned event, strength and depth, was already on the books, and then that took place about 3 or 4 weeks ago. But out of nowhere, 12 days before the qualifier was set to kick off, they went to Instagram and they announced, hey, the qualifier is here. Here's the dates. Here's the date of the competition. And, you and I, Armen, are basically glued to what is going on with dates and announcements. I had no indications this was happening. I don't know if you did either, but it seemed like it just kind of popped out of thin air.
Right, no clue. This is as big a surprise to me as it was for you, and I imagine it's a big surprise for pretty much everybody outside of the strength and depth
community,
team, right?
Yeah, brain trust.
I guess in a weird way, this is just a symptom of this really crazy season that we have in the 2019 game season. It's a setting in which we have no real standards of practice on how best to set up all of these qualifiers, how best to set up the sanctioned events, how much time is needed between these events. There is no precedent set here. And I think that is really what we're seeing here. We're seeing an event that has an opportunity, took that opportunity, is a sanctioned event, and had to essentially bootstrap this event together to have a qualifier that could lead to their sanctioned event. And that is both impressive and also kind of wacky. But that, I think, impressive but wacky, is a great way of looking at what the 2019 game season is going to be.
It actually, you just pointed it out. What was it, 88 days ago, the first sanctioned event was announced. We now have 18 total announced for 2019 and 2020. So it's actually quite impressive how quickly this has come about. But just pointing out just a little bit, games athletes need a little bit of certainty and structure. It's not like they're just going to go, I'm just going to casually go submit my score for this one. They're going in to qualify, and they're preparing to qualify for these. And that the pressure that puts on these athletes for training is significant. So I think it's going to ultimately hurt the caliber of athletes that get that sign up for the qualifier. They are reserving literally 10 spots for wildcard invitations of both the male and the female side. And I think they're going to need every single one. I think they're going to need every single one because I just don't see a lot of athletes go. It started on Sunday. Kudos on them and getting it done. I think they're going to need all those wild cards. So personally, I think it's the only way. And they needed those wild cards to fill the stands because
for sure,
that's ultimately what sells the live stream and the broadcast. That's what fills the seats. You don't want 20 unknowns sitting out there duking it out that no one's ever heard of before. That's not good sport.
Let's go ahead and keep that thought in mind. The idea of 20 unknowns. Let's go ahead and move from the UK all the way out to Australia.
Right.
Because we have a situation in which, unlike Fittest in Cape Town, an event that has kind of come into the international scene and attracted huge levels of competitive, athletes coming in from all over the world, we have an event in Australia that doesn't have that happening. Now, I don't know if the question should be why or how are they going to deal with this, but I'm going to put that one to you, Justin. What is going on?
I think this is a byproduct of being first. Australia, I think they were just much later to the game, and they had a more aggressive time frame. This is also a competition where the qualifier didn't have a bunch of lead-up time either. And so right now, I think we only have Dean Linder-Layton, James Newbury, one other athlete, games athlete, and then Jacob Heppner.
Who knows, man? With Tia Claire Toomey living in Cookeville, Cara Webb is expecting a little she-bear. These types of changes are things that we would have expected to kind of shuffle up the amount and level of competitive athletes showing up to something like the Australian CrossFit Championships. But that said, Australia has 2 events. And if they're not able to fill just one event with the top level caliber athletes to compete for something like this, like a spot at the CrossFit Games, what does this mean? I mean, listen, my personal feeling about this is we're looking at, again, just another consequence of what an interesting and weird 2019 season is going to be. I think things are going to really level off. I think people are going to start understanding how best to plan out their season going into 2020, especially with the Open changing into October. There's going to be so much fluidity, and I think that sort of unknown is what is causing things like this to happen. But that said, we are in the 2019 season.
Yep.
We should have a huge roster, at least a few on both the men's and women's side, and nothing against Dean Linder-Layton or James Newberry. But wouldn't it be interesting to see
Brent Fikowski
on Brent Fikowski showing up, going back to Australia?
Brent should have skipped on China and gone to Australia, because right now, I mean, honestly, if I were Jacob Heppner, who is in a qualifying position. And once the video review is done here, the invites will be sent out in about a week. So TBD on everything there. But this will have been his 3rd sanctioned event he's qualified for. So right now he's actually in the lead for the most qualifications, pending his qualification for Australia CrossFit Championship.
Whatever that's worth.
Well, it's not technically worth anything, but because he declined his invitation to Fitness in Cape Town, I'm really hoping that he picks this one, because if I were a smart athlete and I was thinking really hard about getting back to the games, this would be the one. And they also do not have a self-declared number of wild cards that they're giving out. So they could go in and say, we want to beef up the competition a little bit more. Hey, Brent Fikowski, would you like to come? We'd like to invite you. But if I were Jacob Heppner, this would be exactly where I'm at. I think that number one, the internet is ripe with anticipation on watching him get out of the barn and go onto the floor and throw down with some of these fellas. But I think this would be his literal best opportunity to walk into getting a ticket to the CrossFit Games. That's just me.
Jake is an interesting athlete, and he is a huge fan favorite, and it's been a shame that 2 years in a row he hasn't made it to the CrossFit Games. That said, I think my understanding of his plans is that he's hoping and planning to qualify out of the Open, do a top 20 in the world, and earn that
he's
qualification spot.
He's the kind of athlete that can do that. And,
definitely can do that.
But I still hope he does it, because why put all your eggs in the open basket when the internet demands that you get out there and compete? And it would be a shame not to see him in a CrossFit Games style competition with some other great caliber athletes. I know that if I were Australia, I would have sent an invite to Jacob, because I know that if Jacob is on the live stream, there's a horde of corgi-loving, fitness-loving individuals on the internet that are going to tune into that live stream just because Jacob's the first time he's competed in a couple of years. He didn't even make it to regionals last year. So
forget the invites for Jacob. Jacob
can earn it on his own. He doesn't want
to
it.
Yeah. But what really needs to happen is invites for Winston. Winston the Corgi needs to be invited to every single one of these qualifying events.
He does.
And if he gets a +1 and that +1
happens to be Jacob Heppner,
that's cool. But the fact of the matter is Winston deserves to be at every single one of these events.
I completely agree with that.
Because that is one of the cutest corgis I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yeah, that dog has a bright future ahead of it. By the way, did you see that they're actually selling mats with Winston on it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm crossing my fingers that I can get my hands on it.
Mine's in the mail already, so
I just want to sleep on it. I don't even want to work out on it. I just want to cuddle that little corgi.
I know.
That's it.
Well,
folks, that has been On the Minute. Really appreciate you guys watching. As always, I'm Armen Hammer. That's Justin LoFranco, and we'll catch you next week.
Have a good one.